Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy channel. Today I want to talk about Syria, prophecy, and World War III. On the morning of April 14th, 2018, many in Syria heard missiles arriving. Missiles that were sent by the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. Basically, this was claimed to be in response to what was claimed to be a chemical discharge or use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime over in Syria. U.S. officials have said that the mission was accomplished. They did what they wanted to do. They were pleased that they seemed to have what they considered more or less a surgical type strike. Supposedly there were few or no casualties. No casualties is what I read so far today. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. Syrians apparently some of them were overjoyed. They thought the United States might hit harder, and they were dancing in the streets, is what I've also read today. But the Russians were not so pleased. They called for an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council, and Russia now says it's going to consider supplying S-300 missile systems to Syria. So they considered sending them there before, but because of Western pressures and trying to get along with the West, they hadn't done so. But now, because of this, they may do so. Now, there have been various claims. Some said that 71 of the 121 missiles were knocked out of the sky. The United States government says no, there were none. So they can go back. They'll go back and forth on that. The reality is, missiles were launched. Some things were destroyed. So what's going to happen? Well, let me read a headline from today. A third world war may be coming, and it's starting from Syria. And here's another one. Here's something from a subheadline. Russia doesn't have the conventional military strength to stand up to the U.S. and its allies, so if attacked, it might feel the need to respond asymmetrically or even brandish its nuclear force in a way that could bring about World War III. In Syria, all the makings of World War III are there. Now, this strike on Syria on April 14th, 2018 is not really the start of World War III. World War III is not some kind of a war with the United States, United Kingdom, and France against Russia, Syria, and let's say Iran or something along that line. But there are going to be consequences, different types of consequences. One consequence is that the book of Isaiah has some warnings about what will happen with Syrians, actually. I'm going to read from the New King James Version of the Bible, Isaiah 9, starting in verse 8. The Lord said a word against Jacob, and it has fallen on Israel. All the people will know Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria. Now this is a reference to, the Ephraim reference is a reference to the United Kingdom, essentially, and the Samaria reference is actually a reference to the United States. Now let's go down to verse 11. Therefore, the Lord shall set up the adversaries of reason against him, and spur his enemies on. The Syrians before and the Philistines behind. They shall devour Israel with an open mouth. So we see prophecy here that Syrians are going to cause difficulties at some point in time for descendants of Ephraim and Samaria. So yes, the United Kingdom, United States, ultimately are going to be affected by this. There's prophecies also in Psalm 83, verses 4 through 8, where talk about various Middle Eastern peoples going against the end-time descendants of Israel. But what about Syria itself? What's going to happen to Syria? Well, many of you have heard this particular prophecy, but let me read Isaiah 17, verse 1. The burden against Damascus. Behold, Damascus will cease from being a city, and it will be a ruinous heap. Now, Damascus is the capital of Syria. It has not been turned into a ruinous heap. Now, for it to be a ruinous heap, perhaps we'll see weapons of mass destruction, like nuclear weapons or something being used. This is going to happen. It hasn't happened yet. It is going to happen. It's been claimed that Damascus is the oldest continually inhabited city in the world. Now, while some other cities in the world claim that title as well, the reality is, since the prophet Isaiah was inspired to write this warning about the destruction coming to Damascus, it has not yet happened. Biblical indications are this is something that will happen prior to the start of the Great Tribulation. Now, I'd like to read something that I saw in the news today. This is from somebody by the name of Tim McHyde. It actually probably came out last night. And he wrote, "Many prophecy pundits who expect this prophesied Middle East war often think it will lead next to Ezekiel 38-39 Gog-Magog war. But if you put the Gog identity aside, and he says people are looking at Russia and even the Arabs, you'll see nothing in this scripture about a pre-trib war. And what he's saying here, correctly by the way, is that when many people are saying right now we're going to see this deal with Iran and Russia rise up and attack the tiny nation of Israel, that kind of a thing, they point to prophecies in Ezekiel 38 and 39, but Tim McHyde has correctly said that no, that's not for now. By pre-trib, he means, is it going to happen prior to the Great Tribulation that Jesus told us about in Matthew 24, starting verse 21? And he's correct. It will not happen then. Why do we know he's correct about that particular point? Let's go to Ezekiel 38 and read just 2 of the verses from that chapter, starting verse 8. "After many days you'll be visited. In the latter years you will come into the land of those brought back from the sword and gathered from many people on the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell safely. You will ascend coming like a storm, covering the land like a cloud, you and all your troops, and many peoples with you." Well, the tiny nation of Israel is not dwelling safely. It has not dwelt safely since its formation, which you can debate if it's 1947, 1948, but it's not dwelling safely. The prophecies in Ezekiel 38 have to do with something that happens after Jesus returns, not prior, and certainly not prior to the Great Tribulation. Now, getting back to Tim McHyde's writings, he had some that I had concerns about that they're in error. So let me read some other things that he wrote. "What has to happen first is revealed in another prophecy, Psalm 83. This describes a massive Arab attack on Israel by a confederacy of nations that's never happened in history. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Iraq, and probably Syria. Like Isaiah 17, it predicts a devastating defeat for Israel's attackers. Well, actually, no, it does not. So that's one of his first errors. Then he says, instead of the Gog-Magog war, the effects of this war sets up for something worse. The Great Tribulation cannot commence until the Arabs are taken out of the picture. This war must come next. Is the Middle East prophecy spoken of in so many, war prophecy spoken in so many Old Testament passages cannot fit any other time. Well, he's in error. He is correct that aspects of Psalm 83, where people are going to get together and conspire, will happen prior to the start of the Great Tribulation. He's correct about that. As far as the Arabs go, and being knocked out prior to the time of the Great Tribulation, that's not the case. And to try this into what you might call World War III, Psalm 83 will tie into what you could call World War III. But first, before that happens, there's going to be a deal between essentially the Europeans and the Arabs. I'm going to read some passages from Daniel. Daniel chapter 11, in verses 15-25, talks about the king of the north and the king of the south. The king of the north is a European power. The king of the south is a power of basically Arabic peoples, Cushite peoples, the people basically in the Middle East and North Africa. Verse 27 is what I want to read now. "Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time." So we're talking that the king of the south and the king of the north are going to talk to each other and lie. When you read Psalm 83, you talk about essentially the nations that are part of the king of the south talking to Assyria, which is going to be the head of the king of the north. So then what's going to happen? Well, to find out a sequence, let's look at what Jesus said so you can figure out what happens when. Because a lot of people get confused in terms of prophetic order. So Jesus taught, starting in verse 15 of Matthew 24, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in in the holy place. Whoever reads, let him understand. But let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on a housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So we see a sequence here. Jesus says you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet. Then you're getting to really close to the time of the great tribulation. Well, when does this happen? Well, this abomination is mentioned in Daniel chapter 11 and verse 31. And forces shall be mustered by him, that's the king of the north, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortresses. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. So we see something about the king of the north and this abomination of desolation spoken of in Daniel. Now, if we continue in Daniel, we'll see the sequence. First, we saw that there's some kind of a deal between the king of the north and the king of the south. Then we see the king of the north comes, and the abomination of desolation is spoken of by Jesus is set. That happens. That's set up. So Jesus said, look, when you see that, about times of great tribulation. Then what happens? We'll start in verse 36 and go through the sequence here in Daniel 11. Then the king, that's the king of the north, shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till his wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a god of fortresses, a god his father did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, precious stones, and pleasant things. So we learn a little bit more about this person. He's called the beast. In Revelation chapter 13, he's called the beast of the sea. So what's he going to do? Well, verse 39 is when the Great Tribulation starts. Let's read what he's going to do. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. Well, by going against the strongest fortresses, he's going against the strongest military at the time. In the 21st century, that would be the United States, and to a lesser degree, its Anglo-Saxon allies, such as the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. That's the start of World War III. It's not a Russian invasion of the land of Israel. Now, what about the Arabs? Because Tim McKay said that they get knocked out before the Great Tribulation. No, what happens to them starts the next verse. So let's start with verse 40 of Daniel chapter 11. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries will be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. Now I should comment the word Ethiopians really should be Cushites. But this is a reference again to a confederation of the Arabic peoples. Okay, the people in Egypt and in the Middle East and in Libya. That's what this reference says. The Arabic peoples do not get destroyed prior to the start of the Great Tribulation and World War III. It's afterwards. And anybody who's waiting to see that happening first is in error. And sadly, there are Protestants, Church of God people, and other people who do not understand this prophetic sequence. And as far as the World War III goes, as I say, it will happen. It's likely we're going to see Damascus destroyed first. That could be due to escalations from the current conflict or things further down the line between Israel and Iran and Syria. We know the Bible says that Syria, capital Damascus, will be destroyed. And of course you've got people like the remnant of the Islamic State and others who want to try to destroy Damascus as far as Syria goes. As far as World War III, yes, it's going to come. Is it World War III right now with what the U.S., Britain, and France did to Syria? No. But the latest bombing by those nations is helping set the stage for some prophecies to be fulfilled, including those in Isaiah 17, and ultimately World War III, the Great Tribulation, which will happen. And those who do not think it's going to happen are in error. And again, World War III is not predominantly a battle between the forces of the East and the West. The U.S. is prophesied to be destroyed by the King of the North power. The King of the North power is a European power. And so what's going on with Damascus is only indirectly related to that. It's not directly related to that. Don't believe others who try to tell you otherwise. And also don't believe others who think that the Arabs have to be destroyed prior to the Great Tribulation. That's also in biblical error. Believe what this book says. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible is Prophecy channel.